All right, welcome to Lessons of a Lashpreneur Show. Cheryl, now you're in the hot seat. All right, for those that don't know Untamed Artistry or you, can you kind of give a quick little summary of who you are, who you serve, and how you help them?
Yeah, my name is Cheryl, and I am the founder of a quirky lash brand named Untamed Artistry. We started in November 2019. I launched a brand because I felt that there was a need in the market for a brand that I personally really resonate with, which is a brand that really is rooted in science and understanding why and how something works. I've always been a self-proclaimed nerd. So when I got into lashes, it's no surprise that I became a lash nerd. And I knew that I wasn't alone out there. I knew that there was a lot of artists out there who were very curious and wanted to really understand how and why something worked, from marketing to technique to just even the ingredient in the adhesive that we're using. And then fast forward, I also saw that I'm from Canada, in the Canadian market, there's a scarcity of good products. Most of our Canadian artists are purchasing products from US with a really high markup because of currency exchange as well as duty. So I knew that there was a need for a really great Canadian brand. So I started Untamed Artistry. Really, it's a brand, I guess, that I think of it more of a platform for me to kind of share who I am and what I'm about. And we was able to build a pretty great community of other lash nerds who knew, I could make nerdy the new sexy. And now we have this big community of lash artists who are curious and learners. And that's kind of one of the fundamental, I guess, pillar of our brand, is that we are very generous in sharing information and making sure that education and information are very accessible. Not only, we don't really look at ourselves as just an authority, but we look at ourselves as your study partner, someone who is going out there to gather information for you. As you know, our industry is quite young, so informations are constantly being updated. And so I'm somebody who isn't afraid to say I was wrong about something, and then who's also relentless in seeking for truth. So I represent the industry to go out there and find truth and seek truth and update truth, and then update the community with it.
Love it. Love it. Yeah, you definitely saw a gap in the marketplace and we're like, well, if nobody else is going to fill it, here I am. Love it.
Yeah.
What's interesting is, so I was on Cheryl's podcast a couple months ago now, and we had a really great conversation that I wasn't really aware of your journey as well, but it very much sounded like it was in alignment with my journey too, in a lot of ways. So what was beautiful about our conversation that we had on your podcast was how much of when I stepped away from the business and the mental health struggles that I was going through, that you really resonated with a lot of that. And you had a different experience and you had a different journey that you went on. You didn't have to shut the business down to give yourself permission to just be you. But what I think we really connected on was how much the Instagram life, especially in our industry, and the influencers, and this perception that those of us that have this platform and that have a lot of followers, we got it all figured out, we're just living the high life. And you and I both had the experience of really having our mental health tank, as I'm sure many of the listeners did. And I wanted to talk about how you define success and how you had to redefine success through your own mental health journeys. And where your mindset is now and how you handle the ups and downs. Because I don't know about you, but I still go through big ups and downs. They're not as scary for me because I gave myself permission to do what was scary back then, and it didn't turn out that scary, and I'm better for it. But I really wanted to understand how, if you could share a little bit about your mental health journey and what that looked like in business ownership.
Yeah. First of all, I wanted to say that I'm really grateful for you. I said that in our podcast, but I want your listeners to know as well that you gave me permission. Watching you step away from your business and not knowing whether or not you were going to come back. At the time, all we knew was that you were stepping away, giving up something that seemed very successful. And that's something you have poured your heart and soul into, had gave me permission to feel not okay. Sometimes, you're in this rat race. So you were asking how I defined success prior to that and how I define success now. And I think how I defined success prior to that did come with a lot of comparison. Even at the time, I would say that if you ask the Cheryl at that time, she would say that one of the reasons why, she was able to achieve the success that she had is because I didn't really look at other competitors and compare myself to them. But I realized that that's only because I didn't look at their marketing strategy and compare it to them. But I did look at how I measure success, as in revenue, dollar earned, how many followers we have in our account, and I guess how big the scale of the business that I was able to build. And in some way, as much as I felt like at that time that I wasn't really affected by other people's success, that I was in my own lane and I like to stay in my own lane, a lot of it I was not even just the success of people in the industry. I also have a lot of friends in the startup world as well. So
Yeah.
I was also comparing myself of my success to their success in their startup world. So a lot of it come down to, I define success by performance. And that's not just something I learned in business, but I think it's something that I learned in life, coming from a very contextual culture, the Asian culture. Your worth is almost defined by what you achieve.
Yeah.
So growing up, that's kind of how I'm conditioned. I'm conditioned to think that if I'm not achieving, I'm lazy, I'm unsuccessful, I'm a failure. Prior to starting UA, I have never completed anything. Not college. I dropped out. Never had a real job. So my narrative has always been I'm a failure.
Yeah.
And in my family's eyes, it's like you're not performing, you're not achieving. So building UA was something that was really pivotal for me in my life, because this was the first time in my life I completed a project. Later on, I learned that I have ADHD, so it makes a whole lot of sense now. But that
Neurodivergent
ability,
is what you are, right?
exactly, a neurodivergent. But the ability to complete something was so addicting. That feeling was so addicting that like I was validated for the first time in my life that I'm not inherently lazy, which now looking back, I don't believe anyone is inherently lazy, but I'm not inherently lazy. I'm capable of doing something, and that not all dreams just live in my head, that I can actually make it come true. So I think I held on to that and clinged on to that as my identity, that like, my therapist would tell me, we had this long conversation about success. And she said that success is something that you did, but it's not who you are. For a really long time, I looked at success as who I was, not what I achieved. Without it, what would I be? So I guess fast forward to around the time that, you share about your mental health, I was experiencing some pretty severe burnout, not only because, the burnout of constantly thinking and working in your business, which is what an entrepreneur does. I also started some pretty intensive therapy around that time as well. And I've always thought that entrepreneurship is, a self-discovery journey. It's a way for you to discover who you are and, what works for you and what doesn't work for you. It goes so much beyond like what you make, how much you make, and who you sell to and all of that. So with everything combined, I hit this wall, a really, really hard wall where nothing brought joy. Literally nothing brought joy.
Yep.
Yeah. And I hit a wall and I just felt like nothing brought me joy. And mind you, at that time, if from an outsider's perspective, I think that they would think I had those narrative in my head. I'm ungrateful. I'm unappreciative of the business that I've built. In my first year, despite being in the middle of pandemic, we're able to achieve 7-figure in revenue in our first year. But, I think other people would look at me and just be like, how could you like have all of that and feel like that's not enough,
Right.
and that doesn't make you feel good. Like we are in this industry, like, money is very top of mind, right? We always talk about how do we generate more revenue. The 6-figure revenue, it's talked about all the time by so many coaches, by so many educators. But to me, I was extremely unhappy. And I had to take a look at what was causing my unhappiness. I love marketing, I love business, but I realized that business took over me. And what really brought to the surface was my perfectionism that I have been conditioned to be because of my upbringing, and it all goes back to like your worth and all of this. And at the time, I literally have reached out to a competitor wanting to sell my business.
Mm-hmm.
And I came home one day, I told my husband that I want nothing to do with it. I'm like, take it. I don't want anything to do with it. And that was after seeing your post, I seeing some other people who have also exited industry around that time, that I realized that what I feel isn't like, I'm not alone on this. And so I kind of just took a step back, and I wouldn't say I left my business, but I became a very passive person in my business. And that's when, I think that's what you also call growing pain in the business, right? When you reach to a point where you become the bottleneck and you can no longer grow and you no longer enjoy the things that you're doing. And you just like, let me finally outsource and delegate to get other people to do it. So we did a bunch of hiring around that time, hiring of different executives and other people so that I can just take a step back.
Yeah.
And then during that time, I did a lot of thinking of how I would redefine success, what I really want out of my life. And I think I came out of it learning that success, it's not about what you have, it's about how you feel and how you want to feel. And to me, what I wanted to feel was peace. What I wanted to feel was I'm good enough, like I've done enough. And this is actually a moment where I knew that I was really reaching burnout. Is I went and picked up one of my employees and we're going to go to the office together. She hopped in the car, and at the time I was listening to a podcast at 2x speed. And she got into the car and she's like, am I doing something wrong? Like, why is this person speaking so fast? I'm like, I'm just listening to a 2x speed, I got to consume as much content as I can.
Yep.
And I realized that when we had that moment, I was like, oh my God, when's the last time I listened to music? It was more than 2 years ago. If I'm listening to anything, it had to be a podcast. It had to be a book. It had to be something that's going to make me a better business owner. Business completely defined who I was. I used to think I'm a creative person. I'm an artistic person. I like fashion. I like all these things. But for 2 years straight, I didn't buy a single new piece of clothing. I didn't do anything that brought joy because I felt like anything that I spent towards joy would take me away from the success that I was, trying to accumulate in business. So yeah, life took a huge turn. We brought on board some amazing people, Amory, as you know, and I just started to kind of take more of a backseat into my business. And during that period of time, I think this is something I've actually never shared with openly to anybody. I basically, during that period of time until now, I would still say that I'm not fully recovered from my burnout. I think burnout is one of those things that the longer you're in it, the longer the recovery it's going to take. And since then, I've had a lot of really real and honest conversation with myself of what I want and how I want to live my life. And since then, I've been pulled back a lot into the business, wanting to be more involved. But each time I go back in, I feel like the spark and the fire, it's not there the way it was before. So I think that I am becoming more and more honest with myself that perhaps at this stage of my life, being a fully involved entrepreneur isn't for me right now. And that's really hard because prior to that, I've never achieved anything. This is me. Like what I've achieved with UA is me. But I'm also now 35 weeks pregnant. So I'm entering a new chapter in my life as well, of motherhood. And I've realized that there are many ways to get from point A to point B. And before, I had this mindset that I can only get there by myself. You know, I grew up kind of as a lone wolf, didn't really have any friends. And then the only career I had was professional poker, which it's a career for a lone wolf. So I never really understood the saying of it takes a village or it takes a team. So now I'm learning all of that and learning that it's okay to say no to things that everyone else wants so badly if it's not for you. And I would say that like that makes me a much, much happier person now. And so by my new definition of success, what I want to have is peace of mind. What I want to have is feel good and feel good enough. And I think I have those things. So I would define myself as a successful person now.
Not by cultural standards that you were raised in, or not by even industry standards. It's like, this is Cheryl's definition of success. And what was coming up, this word that's just like a big flashing sign for me when you're talking is alignment, right? And how much burnout is misalignment, and what we experience in our body with anxiety. And we're not talking about like chemical or mental health disorders that are diagnosable. I'm talking about more situational depression, which is what I experienced with the environment I was in, the situations I was in, the state of the world, all that kind of stuff. Is this misalignment, and that's your body's way of telling you we're off track. This is not your purpose. This is not your alignment. This is, you feel energized and you feel like it's not work when you're in alignment, right? And that was what, when I stepped away, I had to get in alignment. And that's even now, and it's been over a year now since I came back. It's so much easier for me to run the business and sense when I'm out of alignment, because I got to what neutral was, right? When you're in depression, it's up and down. Anxiety is like really big highs and lows. I was on antidepressants for years and years and years, and that just basically raises the bottom so you don't go as low. But still, I had to determine what baseline, normal, not chaotic, not living in fight or flight all the time was. And now that I know what that feels like, I'm very aware physically when I'm out of alignment mentally, because all of a sudden I start to feel anxious. All of a sudden I start to have intrusive thoughts, and I start to go more dark and more sad and more negative than what my baseline was. So for me, stepping away, it was determining baseline. And that's why, because I had initially thought, okay, I'm going to give it 3 months, but I gave it 4 because I wanted to stay in that baseline just a little bit longer. But then it got to the point where I was more excited to keep moving. Like I was hungry to move forward, right? And knowing what that baseline is, at least for me in my experience, is now in the business as I'm building out the team, right? And getting back into that, which is a little bit of a trigger for me of building out a team. It's like, okay, when Tara's starting to do too much that's not in her gift and her zone of genius, and it exhausts me, and I have to like discipline myself and even shame myself into doing the actions that the business needs, it's like I'm out of alignment. And like what you said is that you hired team members to do those things, because when you're getting to growing your business to 6 figures, even multiple 6 figures, there's a lot of that hustle, just get shit done, like piece stuff together, duct tape a bunch of stuff, just figure it out, right? But to a certain level, you're gonna cap out, and you need to start to delegate and bring on team members that can do it as good as you and get you your time back, if not better than you. And now you have scalability in your business, where it's not all dependent on you, and you really start to step into that CEO visionary role in the business where you are just working in your gifts. Like my goal for the next 2 years is by the end of that 2 years, just for me to be in the coaching and the marketing strategy part of my business and let everybody else do everything else. And I have no problem doing that stuff. I have no problem recording podcasts. I have no problem talking to people and coaching people. Those are my gifts. It comes easy to me. I don't have to think about it. I don't have to like develop all the stuff. Systems and processes doesn't come naturally to me. I have to force myself to do it. And I've gotten good at it, but I have to force myself to do it. And I don't naturally gravitate towards that. Yet there are people in my team that like, that's just how their brain works. Thank God for them. Right.
That's their love language.
Yes, I know. Like planners and like to-do lists and yeah, right. And anyways, so when you were speaking, it really to me was your body telling you, yes, go this way. No, don't go that way. And we so often, and especially because of childhood and especially because of the pandemic, had these expectations of what we thought success was going to look like. But your body is going to tell you yes or no. And unfortunately, a lot of people resist that so much, and they're not listening to those subtle cues of anxiety, tension, depression, sadness, like you have to force yourself, or you feel like you're not good enough because you're going down a path that is not meant for you.
Mhm.
And oftentimes people have to have major health issues or crises, or somebody in their life dying and passing away, and they have this big aha transformation moment where it's like, I'm no longer settling. Now I'm just going to do what I want to do. And the pandemic kind of gave that for a lot of people, is that they had to stop everything they were doing in the busyness of life and really reflect, am I happy? We call it the great resignation. Like, a lot of people were like, I'm done working for somebody else, right? If
Yeah.
I only get this one life to live, like, this is my moment to go do my thing. And so I think the more in tune you can get with it, your body, and even acknowledge that your body is going to tell you what is meant for you and what is not meant for you. But it's your mind that's going to give you all the objections, obstacles, societal expectations, and all of that other stuff that we've filled our heads with, on whether you give yourself permission to do it or not.
Yeah, for sure. Oh, I was gonna say, like the pandemic was pretty much forcing people to do their for their baseline, right? Because they have no
Yeah.
choice in your, situation, because you're self-employed, you're an entrepreneur, you had to make that deliberate choice that I'm gonna step away to find my baseline. But for a
Mhm.
lot of people who had a job that was no longer available to them, they were forced to be in baseline and feel the difference between what hustling constantly mindlessly versus being intentional and present with their time. And I think that that's one of the biggest thing is, I think it's a blessing in disguise, and I'm a very sensitive person. Because I'm so sensitive, I have very low tolerance for misery. I like to say very low tolerance for misery. And I, looking back in my life, like learning more about mental health and stuff like that, in hindsight, I realized that I was depressed for a large portion of my life. And that depression actually, in some ways, a blessing in disguise, because that means I couldn't, even if I wanted to, even though the voices in my head, the voices of my parents and my generations and my
Yep.
culture telling me, you're supposed to work hard, you're supposed to be this grinder and hustler. But my body just couldn't, because I'm too
Yeah.
sensitive. I'm just like, I'm so miserable. I couldn't do it. So in a lot of ways, that was like a blessing in disguise to
Yeah,
me,
well,
I
even
think.
like you said, your ADHD, and it sounds like that was not something that was even considered as an aspect. And I don't want to make assumptions about your upbringing, but my assumption is this: even if that was something that was diagnosed as your childhood, they would have been like, you're just going to work through it, you're just going to power through it, as opposed to like, okay, we actually need to come up with different strategies and define things
Mhm.
differently. And we have a lot more information about ADHD and mental health now than we did when we were growing up. I mean, I don't remember mental health ever being a conversation until I got into my mid 20s.
Yeah.
And so I think one thing that you talked about in the pre-interview that I want you to kind of just explore more, because I think it's so valuable, is kindness, and the difference between kindness and niceness, and how you can be kind as a business owner, but that's not permission to let people walk all over you.
Yeah.
So share more
I
with me
think
how you
that,
define kindness.
so besides a major pillar of education, another pillar in our company is kindness, because I think that, just like a very, brief summary is, I grew up with a lot of cruelty, I think, not a childhood that is someone I wish upon anybody. And when that childhood, I have learned that I didn't want to be anything like that. So I was going to be the opposite, which is nice. Right. And for a really long time, I think that what I have misconstrued is this, like, being nice is being a good girl, being someone who isn't a nuisance to somebody, who isn't a burden to somebody, who doesn't really say no. In short, being a people pleaser,
Mm-hmm.
essentially.
Yep.
I'm a recovering people pleaser. I still
You
have
and me
those
both.
people pleasing tendencies, right? But when I started a business, one of my inspiration has always been the tech world, because I have a lot of